They said I was always the practical one. Not the brilliant star, not the favorite child, not the baby of the family, just the responsible one. The planner, the girl with spreadsheets and retirement calculators before her 25th birthday. And maybe that was true. But no amount of spreadsheets prepared me for the email I opened that morning. It was 6:12 a.m. The sun had barely crested over the city skyline outside my apartment window, and I was already on my second espresso. The office wouldn't open for another 2 hours, but I liked the silence. It was the only time I didn't feel like I was chasing behind something invisible. Expectations, goals, people who took without thanking. That morning, the email subject line said, Times asterisk, final equity allocation document, closing summary. Asterisk. I clicked. And then I read. And reread. And when I reached the last page, page 9 out of 9, my hand shook so badly I had to set my cup down. Because my name wasn't on it. Not once. Not in the summaries. Not in the allocations. Not in the footnotes. Not even in a typo. They had given it all to her. Everything we were promised since we were children. All the shares. All the voting rights. All the equity. To her. To Ivy. My younger sister, Ivy Margaret Whitaker, who once traded a term paper for a designer purse. Who once crashed my first car because she wanted to test the brakes. Who couldn't even be bothered to show up for the shareholder meetings until Dad let her bring her Cavapoo in a purse. I stood in my kitchen in a silk blouse and pencil skirt that I now hated, and I felt the first crack in a decade-long facade of composure. Maybe it was a mistake, my friend Callie said later that morning, her voice quiet over the Bluetooth as I drove. Maybe they sent the wrong version. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But I knew better. My parents had promised us, both of us, equal shares in Whitaker Solutions, their precious boutique investment firm, when they retired. They used to say it at every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every champagne-drenched New Year's toast. 50-50, girls, Dad would say, gripping the baccarat flute like it was a scepter. You'll both run it one day. Only now, apparently, I wasn't part of the kingdom. By the time I reached the office, my teeth hurt from clenching. My name is Astrid Delaney Whitaker. I'm 32 years old, and until this morning, I thought I was going to be the co-owner of my parents' company. I sat in the back of the boardroom during the 9 a.m. partner meeting like I always did. Not quite invisible, but close enough. It had been that way since I came back from grad school and joined the firm. Always one rung lower than Ivy, even when I worked harder. Especially when I worked harder. And now, as Ivy swept in 15 minutes late with wet hair and a tiny dog peeking out of her tote, my stomach churned. She made eye contact with me, smiled, and mouthed, "Cute shoes." I blinked. Her Louboutins were tapping a rhythm on the marble floor like she was waiting for applause. My father cleared his throat from the head of the table. He looked older than last week. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Before we begin, he said, I want to congratulate Ivy on her promotion. Effective today, she will be our new Executive Director of Innovation. Innovation? She once thought a hedge fund was something you bought to cover shrubs. The room clapped. Lightly, obligingly. I didn't. Dad glanced at me, then looked away. You have every right to be furious, Callie said again over lunch, her chopsticks stabbing the tofu like it had insulted her mother. But what are you going to do? Sue them? They're your parents. I nodded slowly, my appetite gone. No, I said, I'm not going to sue them. Callie raised an eyebrow. Then what? I looked at her, a calm settling over me like a tide. I'm going to buy them out. Buying out my parents wasn't just about money. It was about patience. Timing. Restraint. Things Ivy had never understood. I spent the next 3 months doing everything I wasn't supposed to. I stopped working overtime. I stopped volunteering for extra audits. I stopped trying to please people who had already made their choice. Instead, I studied. I mapped. I listened. I followed whispers in the partner lounges. Traced stock movements. Took quiet meetings with silent stakeholders and old alumni from my MBA days. And most of all, I saved. Every last Sent. Every bonus. Every dividend. I cashed in bonds, closed redundant accounts, and lived like I was broke. Callie called it insane. I called it war. By the time I had enough to make my first real offer, the market had shifted. The firm had lost one major client. 2 more were on the fence. And Ivy had just leased a luxury penthouse downtown and posted it all over social media. Her caption? New views, new me. Quote, I clicked times save on the screenshot. Then I emailed the firm's largest minority shareholder. His name was Edward Bain, 73 years old, a man of few words and fewer smiles. He'd known my father for 30 years, and he had no children. I met him at a quiet cafe in South Bank, dressed in my most neutral blouse and a scentless perfume. The man didn't believe in distractions. He ordered black tea and watched me for a full minute before saying anything. Then, without preamble, why should I sell to you? I didn't flinch. Because you taught my father to read balance sheets, I said, and he taught me, and I'm not Ivy. A long pause. Then he smiled. It was small, but real. Offer in writing, he said. I'll consider. The next few weeks were a blur. Contracts, capital, meetings with 2 other quiet shareholders who liked Dad but didn't love the direction the company was taking under Ivy's rebrand. They remembered me from summer internships, from Christmas parties, from being the girl who actually asked questions instead of trying to flirt her way out of answers. When the final signatures landed, I owned 38% of the company. Ivy owned 32%. My parents collectively owned 30%. I called an emergency vote. Ivy was on vacation in Monaco. She called me a snake over FaceTime. I smiled. Call it what you want. I call it business. My father refused to attend. My mother sent a proxy. I chaired the vote. And I was elected interim CEO. The morning I walked into the building with that new title felt surreal. The receptionist blinked twice before greeting me. I nodded and went straight to the executive office. Not Ivy's. She'd been locked out. The air felt different. Lighter. Callie texted me 5 minutes later. Times asterisk CNN Business wants an interview. I said you'd call them back. Also, I think Ivy just unfollowed you. Asterisk. I replied with a thumbs up. Then I opened the blinds. The sun was high now, blazing. And for the first time in months, I let myself smile. Not because I won, but because I hadn't begged. I had built, brick by brick, quietly. Like the planner they always said I was. But this time, I planned for myself. And it was just beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. By Monday morning, there were murmurs in the hallway. Most employees pretended not to look up as I passed, but I caught them stealing glances. Some confused, some speculative, a few openly startled. I wasn't wearing anything different. No dramatic makeover, no press release, no gaudy power suit. Just a charcoal blazer and black flats. But I had the keys now. The metaphorical ones. The real ones had already been changed by security over the weekend. The receptionist handed me an envelope as I reached the executive elevator. Courier dropped this off for you. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Times asterisk, you'll regret this. Blood before business. -M. Mom. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Still loopy and romantic, like she was writing a love letter in the 1950s. She used to address our birthday cards with ink pens and cursive flourishes. Now she was using them to threaten me. I didn't flinch. I folded the note and placed it in the side drawer of my new desk. Because now it was my desk, not borrowed, not inherited. Mine. The first thing I did was audit Ivy's projects. She had spent close to $170,000 on what was listed as quote, brand engagement consultancy. Turned out it was a 4-month contract with a lifestyle influencer who once got banned from Twitter for selling fake skincare pills. The second thing I did was restructure the budget. I cut redundant marketing streams, froze all non-essential spending, and put the firm back on a conservative projection curve. Some departments hated me for it. Others thanked me quietly. I didn't care either way. It wasn't about being liked anymore. It was about survival. Because what most people didn't know, what Ivy had never even bothered to notice, was that our most profitable client, Lyndhurst Holdings, had started pulling their assets 3 weeks before the equity handover. Their exit was slow, strategic, hidden under layers of compliance talk and review memos. But I saw it, I tracked it, and I knew if we didn't plug the gap in revenue soon, our whole house of cards would start to tremble. I called a meeting with the executive team. 10 people, 6 of whom had once openly favored Ivy. One of them, Dorian Lentz, looked at me like I'd walked in wearing a Halloween costume. "You're interim," he said, before I'd even opened the agenda. I met his gaze. "Yes, and you're head of compliance, Dorian, which means if you missed the Lyndhurst bleed, I'd start prepping your resignation." The room went quiet. I clicked the remote, projected the spreadsheet on the wall, highlighted the exit trends. The declining advisory fees. The note buried in Section 3C of the March update that said, "Strategic shift pending portfolio rebalancing." No one said a word. "Now," I said, "unless someone else would like to take point, I suggest we start doing damage control." The next few weeks were chaos. There were late-night calls, emergency fund reviews. I had to personally meet with the CFO of Lyndhurst in Geneva to present a new retention proposal. Ivy posted Instagram stories from Turks and Caicos. She also went live on TikTok to do a mental health check and described the boardroom vote as a, quote, "public humiliation by a jealous older sibling." It got over 400,000 views. By the time I landed back in London, half our minor clients had seen it. And yet somehow, despite the scandal, despite the noise, I felt clearer than I had in years. I had survived the vote. I had survived the buyout. Now I just had to survive being right. Dad didn't speak to me for a month. Mom sent one-word replies to my emails. Received. Noted. Fine. Ivy? She hired a PR firm to pitch her as a next-gen finance visionary and started floating rumors about launching her own startup. I let her. Because I had other plans. Bigger ones. I wanted to do something Ivy would never dream of. Rebuild Whitaker Solutions into something that wasn't just profitable but untouchable. So I made a list. Step 1. Retain Lyndhurst. Step 2. Recruit talent from outside the firm, even if it meant bruising a few internal egos. Step 3. Launch a stealth fund that would prove we could outperform Ivy's flashier initiatives using actual numbers. Step 4. Prepare to go public. It was bold, risky, unapologetically aggressive. But it was mine. And I wasn't going to apologize. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the dean of my business school. "Astrid," he said warmly, "we're hosting a panel on women in finance. We'd love to feature you." I almost said no. I didn't want the spotlight. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that Ivy had been invited first and bailed. Maybe it was the thought of standing on that stage and saying, out loud, that I hadn't just survived the handover, I had turned it into leverage. So I said yes. The night before the panel, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous. Because I was angry again. Angry at how long I'd accepted silence as safety. Angry at how easily my parents had dismissed me. Angry that my sister had turned betrayal into a PR narrative. I stood in the mirror brushing my hair and thought, you're not a footnote. You're the headline. The next morning, I walked into the university hall in a tailored navy dress, hair pinned up, heels sharp. The crowd clapped when my name was called. I sat between a fintech founder and a hedge fund COO. And when the moderator asked, "What advice would you give a woman who's been passed over?" I answered, "Don't ask them to choose you. Build something they can't ignore." The room went still. Then it exploded. That night, Callie came over with wine and cake. "You killed it," she grinned, replaying clips on her phone. "Everyone's talking about that line. You should trademark it." I smiled, but my mind was already elsewhere. Because in the middle of the panel, during the applause, I had received a text from a blocked number. Times asterisk, Dad is selling, she's going to make a move, be ready, E. Asterisk, Times Edward Bain, always a man of few words. But when he spoke, he didn't waste syllables. Ivy was coming back. And this time, she wanted revenge. The first sign came the next morning. A leaked blog post, published anonymously, describing Whittaker Solutions as internally divided, led by nepotism, and unstable after a hostile takeover. It used terms that only someone inside would know. I didn't have to guess. Ivy. She was back in London. She was already making moves. I called an emergency meeting with our communications director and legal team. We prepped statements, drafted counters, pulled receipts. But what scared me wasn't the bad press. It was how calculated it was. This wasn't Ivy lashing out. It was Ivy playing chess. And somewhere in the fog of my strategy, I'd forgotten that she had learned from the same people I had. She wasn't the girl who crashed my car anymore. She was the woman who wanted her company back. And I had exactly one shot to stop her. To be continued. The wind howled outside my apartment that night, rattling the antique window panes like an omen. I sat cross-legged on the floor in sweatpants, surrounded by open folders and legal briefs, the remnants of a day spent dodging landmines in the press. The soft buzz of my phone lit up another headline. Asterisk, Whittaker's Ice Queen, inside the rise of an unsmiling CEO. Asterisk. I didn't need to click. I knew the angle already. Cold. Ruthless. Too ambitious. Too plain. Too unlikable. A week ago, I was invisible. Now I was a cautionary tale with cheekbones. Ivy was everywhere and nowhere. Her name didn't appear in the blog posts. Her fingerprints weren't on any official documents. But the whispers had her scent. The timing. The precision. It wasn't an outburst, it was a campaign. And I was its target. The next morning, I walked into the office early. Earlier than usual. Before the cleaners. Before the baristas at the ground floor cafe had turned on the espresso machines. I needed stillness. Time to think. Edward Bain called at 6:03 a.m. sharp. You read it? All of it, I said. She's shopping for buyers. Foreign, quiet types. Doesn't want to trigger public attention. Vultures. He grunted. She has about 2 weeks before her trust expires. Right, the trust. Back when we were teenagers, our parents had created irrevocable trusts for each of us to hold portions of future equity. It was all smoke and mirrors for tax purposes then, but now it mattered. Ivy's trust was set to expire on her 30th birthday, which was in... I checked my phone. 12 days. 12 days until she lost the legal protections that let her play with power she didn't fully own yet. And I had 12 days to build something that couldn't be touched. You want to form a shield company? Callie blinked. More like an armory, I said, flipping the diagram on my screen. You know this makes you look even more like the villain, right? Good. Villains don't get stolen from twice. We were sitting in my apartment-turned-command center. Takeout containers lined the windowsills. Financial journals littered the coffee table like war maps. On my main screen was a layout of international shell structures, shielded by layered holding entities and offshore custodians. You want to hide Whittaker's growth engine inside a ghost company based in Luxembourg? No, I want to build a new fund. With fresh branding, clean legal lines. A fund that absorbs all our new clients and IP and technically doesn't belong to Whittaker, yet. Callie raised her wine glass. And what will you name your bunker baby? I stared at the blank file tab. Then typed one word, Mistock. Mistocks. Mistock Delaney. My middle name. The only thing my parents hadn't tried to take from me yet. We filed the incorporation papers in the next 36 hours. Callie brought in 2 of her contacts from the private equity world, discreet, untraceable. capable of structuring vehicles that would make even the most dogged forensic accountant squint. I transferred the IP rights from 3 of our internally developed analytics tools into Delaney. Then I had our lead engineer, who hated Ivy with a fiery passion, resign from Whitaker and sign on as CTO of Delaney. He grinned when he signed. "Feels like Christmas." I smiled. "Merry War." The news hit Ivy like a brick. At least, I assumed it did. Because 48 hours later, I received an official request for mediation from her lawyer. Not a lawsuit, a negotiation. She wanted to meet. I said yes. We chose neutral ground, a glass conference room inside a private firm that specialized in high-profile family business conflicts. I arrived first, calm, ready. She walked in wearing black leather and sunglasses, indoors. Always performative. She didn't sit. "You can keep the CEO chair," she said. "I want Delaney." I blinked. "You're not subtle. I'm not interested in crumbs. You launched the only thing in this company with actual upside in 5 years. You're welcome, by the way. My scandal gave it traction." I leaned back. "Delaney isn't under Whitaker's umbrella. You used Whitaker's staff, Whitaker tools, my budget. Your budget was locked when you were sipping rosé in Marbella." She smirked. "Doesn't matter. I'll challenge the IP transfer. I'll drag it through the courts. I'll bury your little side hustle in filings until you can't breathe." I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then I said, "Let's make a trade." She narrowed her eyes. "I'm listening." I slid a paper across the table. 1 page. Typed in clean Arial. "You take a buyout. A real one. Market value. No face-saving titles. No ceremonial board seats. Cash and walk. And in return, I withdraw Delaney's absorption clause." Her jaw twitched. "You mean you keep Delaney, and I walk away?" "Yes." "No." She stood. "I want a stake in Delaney. At least 25%. Then we go to war." She leaned down, placed both palms on the table. "You think you're stronger than me, Astrid? You think you can erase me? I have media. I have friends." "You had friends. Now they're watching to see who bleeds first." We stared at each other in silence. Then she laughed. "You've changed." "No, I just stopped apologizing." She left. No deal. The next 5 days were a siege. She filed an injunction against Delaney in a UK commercial court. We countersued with documentation of her absence, her misappropriated budget, her public misbehavior. She released an op-ed. I released internal memos she had edited to hide losses. She launched a podcast episode called "My Sister Stole My Future." I launched Delaney's first product. It got 3.2 million impressions in 2 days. Whitaker's stock value ticked upward for the first time in 4 months. The board issued a unanimous vote of confidence. I didn't sleep for 72 hours. But when I did, I dreamed of silence. Day 10. My father called me. First time in 6 weeks. "Astrid," he said, his voice rough. "Dad, you're making a mess." "No, I'm building something from one. Your sister is threatening to sue the family. Then she should send her retainer." A long pause. Then he said, "You know your mother is heartbroken. She made her choice. We made mistakes. No, you made decisions. I lived through the outcomes." He exhaled, ragged. "Do you want this to end?" "Yes." "Then what do you want?" I told him. 1 clean split. Ivy walks with her trust. No extra, no interference, no stake in Delaney. They transfer the remaining 15% of their combined holdings to employee stock options. Whitaker becomes an employee-owned firm. They retire. Permanently. He said nothing. Then, "We'll discuss." He hung up. Day 11. Ivy's attorney called. "She agrees." I stared at the phone. "To everything?" "Yes. On one condition, which is, you give a statement, public, acknowledging her past contributions. I laughed. But then I thought about it. About power. About story. About how few women ever got to write their own ending. And I said yes. The statement was short, strategic. My sister and I have chosen different paths. Her contributions in the firm's early expansion phases are appreciated. As we move forward, I remain committed to a future rooted in integrity, resilience, and transparency. It went viral. Some called it graceful. Others called it cold. I didn't care. Because on day 12, Ivy signed the final documents. On day 13, Delaney announced its first full fund round. Oversubscribed. And on day 14, I opened the envelope my mother had sent weeks ago. I reread her words, blood before business. And then I took out a pen and wrote on the back. So, pen, asterisk, business is blood if you've bled for it. Asterisk, to be continued. On the morning the wire cleared, I stared at the bank screen for a full minute. $47.3 million. That was the price Ivy accepted for walking away. Technically, it was a buyout of her trust holdings. A clean transaction that would be buried under layers of confidentiality clauses and retroactive employment settlements. But to me, it was something else. It was silence. It was freedom. It was the final note in a long, dissonant symphony. And now that it was over, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. I stepped outside into the wind. Spring had finally crept into the city, the kind of weather that made strangers look up from their phones, sunlight threaded between the skyscrapers like hope. I walked without direction, past cafes, bookstores, art galleries, past places I hadn't let myself linger in for years. When I finally stopped, I was in front of an old building tucked between two high-rises. The windows were streaked with rain. The paint on the sign was peeling. It was the first Whitaker Solutions office. We'd outgrown it by the time I was in university, but Dad never sold it. He called it sentimental equity, a phrase that used to make me roll my eyes. Now I just stared. 3 hours later, I was back in the office. A real one this time. The top floor of the Whitaker Tower. Mine. Delaney had launched its fund round. The capital raise exceeded expectations by 220%. More than 40% of new investors were women-led firms. The team had grown overnight. Engineers, analysts, legal, and a brand team that didn't flinch when I vetoed the glossy slogan they'd proposed. Let's stop selling dreams, I'd said. Let's sell results. They redesigned the campaign in a day. I approved it in 5 minutes. There was something exhilarating about speed, about momentum, about not needing anyone's permission anymore. The next board meeting was different. For the first time, everyone showed up on time. Everyone looked at me when I spoke, and no one, not even Dorian Lentz, interrupted. I laid out a new strategy. 3-year reinvestment cycle. Tiered growth incentives for all employees, with a matching equity grant. A cap on C-suite bonuses unless performance thresholds were met. Silence. Then a slow ripple of nods. It wasn't just the plan. It was the tone. The certainty. The room knew who was leading now. Not the daughter. Not the sister. The architect. Later that night, I received a message from an old professor. He had read about the buyout, about Delaney, about the shakeup at Whitaker. Astrid, he wrote, you always ask the hard questions. Keep asking. It hit me harder than I expected. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the message again and again, and then I opened a blank page. I started writing. A letter. To myself. To the version of me that used to think she had to earn love by being useful, quiet, efficient, agreeable. I told her she was more than a backup plan. I told her she had built an empire out of wreckage, and she had done it without asking for applause. The next morning, I wore red. A red silk blouse I'd never dared to wear before. Too bold, too loud, too visible. But today I wanted to be seen. As I stepped into the elevator, a junior associate looked up and stammered. Ms. Whitaker, congratulations on everything. Seriously, we're all really proud. I nodded. Thank you. Then I added, softly, call me Astrid. He blinked, then smiled. The elevator dinged. I walked into a new day. That week, we hosted an internal summit for Delaney. 75 employees, most under 30, most first-time hires in private equity. A mix of analysts, developers, strategists, marketers. We rented a raw industrial space in Shoreditch and turned it into a think tank. No suits, no PowerPoint decks. Just whiteboards, coffee, and 3 days of problem solving. I didn't speak until the final hour. Then I stood up. No mic, no stage. When we started Delaney, I said, we didn't know how big it would become. We only knew what we didn't want to repeat. I paused. No hierarchy that hides bad ideas. No culture that rewards silence. No ownership that punishes ambition. More silence. Then applause. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. Not because of the noise, because of the belief in it. That Friday, I received a letter. Real paper, real pen. From Ivy. One line. Times asterisk. You win. But I'll write my version. Asterisk. I smiled. Then write it, I whispered. Because the truth was, I didn't need to control the story anymore. I was living mine. Sunday morning, I walked past the old Whitaker office again. This time, I stopped. I pulled out my phone and texted Callie. Tomes, asterisk. Let's buy the building, asterisk. She replied with one word. Asterisk, done, asterisk. Then another. 92 asterisk. Why? Asterisk. I replied, times asterisk. Because stories need foundations, asterisk. And I wanted mine built on stone, not apologies. To be continued. We closed on the old building in 12 days. Cash. It felt symbolic, walking through the door I hadn't entered in 15 years. The lobby was still painted the same weathered eggshell white. The stairs creaked in the same places. Dust clung to the corners like time itself had curled up and slept there. I ran my fingers over the rail, half expecting to feel echoes of my childhood. I didn't. Instead, I felt the wood grain, real, solid. No illusions left. We gutted the interior, turned it into a think lab for our most experimental ideas. I called it Times the Foundation's Time, our internal codename for what we were building next. Callie said it was poetic. I said it was necessary. Because now that Ivy was gone and the press had calmed down, the real work had begun. The plan was simple: use Delaney as the innovation engine and let Whitaker stabilize as the legacy mothership. Conservative returns, predictable performance, safe for institutional investors. But Delaney? Delaney would become a machine. We hired the best minds we could find, quietly of course. No splashy LinkedIn posts, no media circus, just talent, lots of it. Engineers from climate tech startups, hedge fund quants disillusioned with the old guard, a neuroscientist from MIT who thought behavioral finance had been misunderstood for decades. And me, still waking up every morning at 5, still reviewing every contract line by line, still the planner. Only this time I was planning a revolution. But power never leaves quietly, not even when it's paid to. It started with Whispers, one of the boutique firms Ivy had tried to pitch before the buyout had suddenly begun circling again. They started poaching our vendors, offering strange retainer contracts to our data providers. It didn't feel random. It felt like chess. By the end of the week, we traced it to a new entity registered under a shell in the Isle of Man. Name: Marrow Strategic Capital. Board: obscured. But the COO, a man who used to date Ivy. She's still playing, Callie said, pouring us both coffee at midnight. Then let's move faster. I escalated Phase 2 of Delaney, portfolio integration. Instead of letting Delaney operate as a loose fund, we restructured it into a holding company, one with arms, one with teeth. We began acquiring startups. Quietly, surgically. First, a fintech automation platform based in Dublin, then a predictive modeling company in Estonia, a B2B compliance tool out of Toronto. Within 90 days, we had a core tech stack under our umbrella. We called the internal framework NIME Anchor. It would allow us to service clients in 3 verticals simultaneously, without them ever realizing they were part of the same network. Invisible infrastructure. Just like I'd once been. It was about this time that my father called again. "I saw the piece in the Times," he said. "You're rebuilding fast." "Yes. You always did move quietly. That's how you taught me." He was silent. Then, in a strained voice, "You know your mother still cries about the Christmas she missed. She missed it on purpose. People make mistakes, Astrid. And other people clean them up." He sighed. "Ivy's not the only one who regrets what happened." "Then perhaps you should write May Shap a letter." I hung up. That week, Forbes ran a piece titled, "Times*, The Quiet Coup, How Astrid Whittaker Outplayed a Dynasty and Built a Fortress." It went viral. I didn't read the comments, but my team printed it, framed it, hung it in the foundation. Under it, they added a quote from my summit speech. Times*, let's stop selling dreams. Let's sell results. Delaney's fund reached $1 billion valuation 6 months ahead of schedule. Whittaker posted its best quarter in 5 years. Our employee equity program doubled in size. I started getting calls from policymakers. "Would you consider speaking to the Treasury? Could you consult on small business regulation? Would you consider an appointment to the Financial Advisory Committee?" I said yes. Once. Only once. Because I didn't want to be a celebrity. I wanted to be a storm. In the background, Mero Strategic continued to make moves. They bought out a boutique firm in Prague. They launched a rival platform. And then they made a mistake. They tried to acquire a company we already owned, through Delaney. They didn't realize until the last minute. The press release was already drafted. We posted a quiet update. Dimes*, Delaney Holdings has absorbed ThirdSpan Analytics. Integration complete. And in the footer, one last line. Times*, we thank Mero Strategic for their interest. 2 hours later, Ivy posted an Instagram story. Just the word coward over a black screen. I didn't respond. Months passed. The city changed seasons. So did I. I stopped waking up anxious. I started traveling again. I visited the mountains in Austria, where no one recognized my name. I took a cooking class in Lisbon. I read poetry. And one night, back in London, I stood in the Foundation building alone. The lights were dim. The air smelled like paint and ambition. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have accepted a title and a pat on the head just to keep the peace. And I whispered, "She's gone." Not with anger, with clarity. Then, one last letter arrived. From Ivy. It was typed, no signature. "You win the boardroom, I win the story." I folded the paper, wrote one line on the back. I don't need to win twice. To be continued. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. 6 months after Mero Strategic's last failed acquisition attempt, I received a dinner invitation. Not a formal one. Just a folded piece of thick ivory cardstock slipped under my office door. No sender. No address. Just a date, a time, and 2 words printed in deep navy ink. Times, foreclosure. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't need to guess. There was only one person who would send a message like that without putting her name on it. Ivy. The place was obvious. Her favorite restaurant in Mayfair. The one she used to insist on for every birthday dinner when we were kids. The one with the wine list longer than a novel and a maitre d' who once told me I was underwhelmingly dressed. I almost tore it in half. Instead, I texted Callie. Asterisk, she wants closure. Asterisk. Callie replied. Asterisk, closure is a fairy tale we tell ourselves to avoid winning too hard. Asterisk, I went anyway. Ivy was already seated when I arrived. She wore white, head to toe, diamond studs, a single gold ring, her hair pinned in an effortless twist. She looked like serenity carved into glass. I wore black. We didn't hug. You came, she said, lifting a glass of something pale and sparkling. You called. I didn't call, I invited. Same thing. She smiled. Are we still speaking in metaphors, Astrid? No. Just facts. The waiter approached. She ordered for both of us. Without asking. Some things never changed. You're doing well, she said after he left. So are you. She laughed. Am I? According to who? I shrugged. Your followers. Ah, yes. Digital worship. It's a drug. Is that why you quit? She tilted her head. Who said I quit? The food arrived. We didn't touch it. I waited. She waited longer. Then, finally, do you remember the Christmas when Mum made us choreograph dances for the guests? I blinked. That was not what I expected. The Nutcracker, I said. I was the Snow Queen. You were the Sugar Plum Fairy. She let you choreograph it, Ivy said softly. I was 7. You were 11. And I remember thinking, it'll always be her story. You had a pink tutu. You threw glitter at the guests. Exactly, she said. I distracted. You built. I said nothing. Then, almost too quietly to hear, it hurt, you know, not being seen for anything except my noise. My throat tightened. Because I had spent so many years thinking she had taken everything from me, recognition, opportunity, equity, that I never once stopped to consider what she thought I had taken from her. Certainty, direction, maybe even identity. But empathy doesn't erase damage. I stirred my wine glass with a fingertip. We could have built something together. She nodded. But you never trusted me. Because you never earned it. Silence again. So, she said, closure. You think that's what this is? No, she said. I think this is what's left. I didn't argue. She slid a small envelope across the table. It's not a threat. It's a gift. I didn't open it. We stood at the same time. Reflex. Shared instinct. At the door, she looked at me one last time. We were never meant to share a crown, Astrid. I don't wear crowns, I said. No, she whispered. You build kingdoms. And then she walked away. Inside the envelope was a list. 6 names. All high-ranking advisors from Marrow Strategic. All resigning. Each had left a final note, some brief, some bitter. All citing ethical misalignment. Attached was a handwritten sentence from Ivy. Symes asterisk. Every throne needs a court. You won. I broke mine. Use them if you want. Asterisk. Asterisk. I didn't use them. Not at first. But I made calls. Quiet ones. And slowly, their replacements became part of a new advisory board for Delaney. Not because I needed the validation, but because stories aren't sustained on revenge. They're built on vision. That summer, Delaney's growth tripled. Our flagship portfolio outperformed by 12.7%. A former competitor filed for bankruptcy. Whitaker remained steady, no scandals. No drama. I appointed a new CEO for the legacy firm, a woman who had started as an intern 10 years earlier. She cried when I told her. I simply said, make them proud to work for you. She did. 1 year later, I stood alone on a rooftop in Lisbon. Looking out over the water, I thought of all the things I had let go of. The need to be right. The ache to be loved on someone else's terms. The quiet desperation to be chosen. Instead, I had chosen myself. I had chosen truth. And I had written a story that no one could rewrite. Not even Ivy. To be continued. The next chapter didn't begin with a grand announcement or a press release. It began with a letter. Typed. Stapled. Hand-delivered to my assistant. From the Prime Minister's Financial Advisory Committee. They wanted me to chair the next roundtable on sustainable economic innovation. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely they meant to ask someone flashier, someone with media presence and the charisma of a TED Talk regular. Not me, the planner. The fortress. The woman who had built $1 billion fund by whispering behind the scenes. But no, it was addressed to me. Full name. Full title. Astrid Delaney Whitaker. I read it twice. Then I tucked it into the leather journal I carried everywhere. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to sit down. Not to strategize. Not to fight. To think. The committee roundtable was held inside a centuries-old building in Westminster. Oak panels, gold trim, more history in its floorboards than in any textbook. I wore navy. Ivy would have worn white. The other members were sharp, older, and used to speaking over each other. I didn't mind. I watched. I listened. And when I spoke, I made sure they did too. We can't keep funding fossilized models and call it progress, I said. Innovation without accountability is just a prettier form of collapse. The room went quiet. And just like that, I knew I belonged. When I returned to Delaney's headquarters, something felt different. It wasn't the growth. We had passed a new threshold in assets under management. It wasn't the headlines. We were finally being treated as more than a novelty. It was the people. They looked at me not as a survivor of scandal or a sister who clawed her way to relevance. They looked at me like a founder. We began construction on a new vertical, Delaney Futures, an incubator for women-led ventures. Tech, finance, sustainability, seed stage support, backed by a team of partners who had once been denied funding simply for being too young, too different, or not the right fit. We launched it in silence, no gala, no influencers, just a website with 3 words. Times Knives Times Fund. Build. Rise. Applications poured in. We had to triple our review board in 2 weeks. And one morning, over coffee, Callie said something I'll never forget. You didn't just beat the system, Astrid. You replaced it. That autumn, Ivy sent another message. A package, this time, wrapped in cream paper. Inside, a hardcover book. Title, No Menu, Malib Blood Before Business. Her memoir. The dedication page read, To my sister, you taught me to write my own ending. I sat on my living room floor and turned the pages one by one. She didn't paint herself as the villain, but she didn't erase me either. She called me relentless, cold, focused, brilliant, strategic. She called me the sister who held up the mirror she didn't want to face. And near the end, in a chapter called The Crownless, she wrote, Asterisk. She didn't wear a crown, she wore steel, and she built something from the ground up that no one could burn. I closed the book, exhaled, and felt, for the first time, not anger, but understanding. Delaney Futures closed its first round with 26 funded ventures. Whitaker Solutions published its first impact report showing equitable pay across all roles. Our joint analyst program with a public university launched to a full cohort. I gave a keynote for the first time in my life. Standing alone under the lights of a 1,000-seat hall, I told them the truth. I was never supposed to lead, not by their blueprint, but I made a new one. And you can too. Standing ovation. Later, someone from the crowd handed me a note. It read, I didn't know I was allowed to want more, until now. I carried that note in my wallet. Still do. The last time I saw Ivy wasn't at an event, or in an office, or through a phone screen. It was in a bookstore. She was holding a copy of someone else's memoir. Her sunglasses were perched on top of her head. Her hair was shorter now, sleeker. She looked happy. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the PR smile, the real one. Small, quiet, forgiving. Building anything new? She asked. Always, I said. She nodded. Me too. And then we walked in opposite directions. No drama, no parting words, just a moment. And it was enough. Back at the foundation, I stood under the framed quote again. Let's stop selling dreams. Let's sell results. Only now, we were doing both. And I finally understood what that meant. Because the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. And I wasn't just rewriting mine. I was building it for others. To be continued. 2 weeks after Ivy and I passed each other in that quiet bookstore, the world started calling again. Not the scandal chasers or the echo chamber interviews. This was different. Institutional, legacy media, policy heads, think tanks, old names that had never taken my calls before. They didn't just want my story anymore. They wanted my insight. The World Economic Forum reached out. Would I consider joining a panel on post-capital innovation? The phrasing made me laugh. Only a WEF delegate could turn capitalism's inevitable entropy into a hashtag. Still, I said yes, not for visibility, for influence. Because the longer I sat at these new tables, the more I realized the people building tomorrow weren't always the ones who had survived yesterday. Delaney's second-year growth was staggering. We crossed $2.1 billion in AUM. But what mattered more than the numbers was what we funded. A real-time fraud prevention tool built by 3 Syrian engineers. A regenerative agriculture analytics platform run by a black mother of 4. An AI-driven public benefits interface coded by an ex-con who learned Python while serving time for hacking a corrupt nonprofit. I read every pitch, every application, every origin story. And I felt something crack open in me. Something I hadn't known was still sealed shut. Hope. Not blind. Not naive. Earned. One night, I was at the foundation, walking the mezzanine level. Below me, I saw 3 junior analysts debating projections on a whiteboard, like their lives depended on it. They were maybe 25. Passionate. Fierce. Loud. I remembered being their age, desperate to be useful, careful not to take up too much space. Now, I wanted them to take up all of it. So I walked down the stairs, grabbed a marker, and added my own line to the board. They gasped. Was that a projection error? One asked. No, I said. It was an opening. They didn't understand it yet. But they would. Because no one had made space for me like that when I started. But I could make space for them. 6 months into the year, a scandal rocked a rival firm. Embezzlement. Harassment cover-ups. Equity manipulation. Suddenly, investors were looking for a safer place to go. And they came to Delaney. Not because we were flashy. Because we had receipts. Because we had frameworks. Compliance. Transparency. Because we published our gender pay gaps quarterly, not annually. Because we didn't just talk about ethics, we baked it into the code. One institutional investor said it best. Your governance protocols are brutal. I trust you. Client Callie sent me a meme one morning. A screen grab of Ivy's memoir, now listed as a recommended text in a course at Oxford on narrative capital. She wrote, Hasterix, congrats, you're officially syllabus material. Asterix. I laughed, then screenshotted it and saved it in a folder labeled Hallan Believable. In the same folder, the first check we ever received for Delaney, a napkin sketch of our original logo, a voice memo from an intern who once told me, "You don't scare me. You make me want to show up better." I never deleted anything. Not because I couldn't let go, because I wanted to remember every mile. Every step. Every scar. One day, I opened a letter from my mother. Handwritten, blue ink, her old stationery. Asterisk. You were always the one we leaned on, and we leaned too hard. I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I hope you know I see it now. All of it. And I'm proud. Fiercely. Quietly. Proud. I read it twice. Then I placed it next to Ivy's book on my shelf. Not as trophies. As reminders. Some stories don't need rewriting. They just need finishing. When Delaney turned 3, we held a quiet celebration. No fanfare. Just a rooftop dinner with the original team. I stood and gave a toast. To the ones who stayed, the ones who built, the ones who saw the storm and didn't run. We drank, we laughed. And for a brief moment, I forgot all the battles it took to get here. I was just a woman surrounded by other builders. And it was enough. Then the acquisition offers started. Big ones. Tech giants. Multinational banks. Legacy capital firms that once called us naive. They wanted Delaney. At first I laughed. Then I cried. Not because I was tempted. Because it proved something I had suspected all along. They didn't know how to build it. But they'd pay anything to own it. Blashineand. We didn't sell. Instead, we launched a new division, Delaney Commons, a public access financial literacy platform, free tools, open source code, translations in 30 languages. The industry called it unscalable. We called it necessary. And in its first 3 months, it reached 1.2 million users. From Bolivia to Birmingham. From Karachi to Kansas. Real people. Real needs. Not clients. Citizens. I still wake early, still walk the halls of the foundation before most lights are on. But now, when I pass the framed quote on the wall, I smile. Let's stop selling dreams. Let's sell results. Because we're doing both. And the dream, the real one, isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who believed. To be continued. The 4th anniversary of Delaney arrived with no warning. There was no countdown, no marketing campaign. Just a reminder from my assistant, and a handwritten note slipped into my planner from one of our interns. Times asterisk. Thanks for building something we could believe in. We believe in you. Asterisk. I read it on a rainy Tuesday morning while waiting for a car to take me to Parliament. Not because I had asked for more political exposure, but because they had asked me. Again. This time, it wasn't a roundtable. It was testimony. On record, in front of a cross-party committee evaluating economic innovation. They wanted me to talk about capital accountability. What they really wanted was to understand how someone like me had built something like Delaney, and why people trusted it more than they trusted the system itself. I sat in the hearing room with my back straight and my words sharper than ever. Finance isn't broken because people don't understand it, I said. It's broken because it was never built to be understood. That's not complexity, that's camouflage. 1 megapixel leaned forward. And you think Delaney is the answer? No, I replied. I think it's a blueprint, but blueprints only matter if you share them. That went viral. A clip of it made the rounds for days, on political blogs, in investor Slack channels, even TikTok. Some praised me. Others mocked me. But the truth had already landed. Delaney wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement. Back at headquarters, I found the team huddled in the Foundation Strategy Lounge. New applicants had flooded the Commons platform since the hearing. NGOs, student collectives, governments. People who had never had access to a single cent of venture support were now building pitch decks on borrowed Wi-Fi, using our templates. We can't keep up, one analyst said. Yes, we can, I replied. We're not a firm anymore. We're infrastructure. And the moment I said it, something clicked. We needed to scale again. Not up. Out. Delaney International was born in a 2 a.m. conversation with Callie. You're really gonna try it? She asked, hair up, eyes blazing. No, I said. We're gonna try it. She stared at me. Global equity models? Open capital networks? Shared IP between sovereigns? And shared risk, I added. For once. She laughed like she was terrified and thrilled all at once. Then she said, I'm in. 6 months later, we had legal registration in 5 countries. Our Commons platform was translated into 42 languages. Delaney Ventures opened its first satellite office in Nairobi, a second in Sao Paulo, the third in Warsaw. And at each opening, I didn't make speeches. I handed the mic to the regional directors, people from those cities, people who had grown up seeing finance as something done to them, not with them. We reversed the model. They weren't branch managers. They were architects. Some called it reckless. Others called it visionary. But everyone noticed. A startup magazine called me the Quiet Radical. A political columnist accused me of trying to build a parallel economic order. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It never really was. Then came the leak. An email. An internal document from a legacy firm. One of the oldest in London. A list of uncooperative disruptors. Delaney was number 1. Next to my name, someone had typed times asterisk, too clean. Can't be bribed. Discredit if possible. Asterisk time. I read it like it was a poem. Then I printed it. And I pinned it inside the foundation's front hallway. Let them see it, I told the team. Let them know what we are. Later that week, I sat on the rooftop again. The same spot where we celebrated year 3. Only now I wasn't alone. 3 of our newest venture leads sat with me, legs dangling over the edge like we weren't reshaping the fabric of the world below. One of them, a woman named Sabine from Morocco, said, "I never thought I'd sit at a table like this." I replied, "Then we need to build better tables." She nodded, and stronger legs. I laughed. She was right. By the 5th year, we were everywhere. Not in headlines. In infrastructure. Delaney Systems quietly powered microloan platforms in Vietnam. Tracked social housing credits in Norway. Verified climate grants in coastal India. We weren't splashy. We were foundational. And when someone from a famous consulting firm said, "What's your exit strategy?" I said I didn't come to exit. I came to stay. One evening, I received a call from Ivy. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. "I read the New Yorker piece," she said. "They called you the woman who turned betrayal into architecture." "Dramatic," I replied. "True, though." I waited. Then she added, "Mom wants to see you." My chest tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's tired," Ivy said. "She's different now, softer." "I'm not." "I know," she whispered. "But maybe you don't need to be sharp around her anymore." I didn't answer. But a week later, I walked into my mother's garden, and she stood, shaky but smiling. And for the first time in years, she hugged me first. I still wake up early. Still walk the foundation before dawn. But now, instead of hunting fires, I plant seeds. And every so often, I pass a wall where the interns hang notes, messages, reminders. One caught my eye last week. It said, times asterisk, if they try to bury you in silence, plant roots. Asterisk, no signature. But I knew who had written it. A girl like me, once. To be continued. The 6th year began in snow. A London winter that iced over everything. The Thames, the rooftop terrace of the foundation, even the fountain outside Parliament. But inside Delaney, we were heat, motion, velocity. And I had changed. The woman who once sat silently at boardroom tables now ran one of the most quietly powerful financial infrastructures in the world. No crown. No spotlight. But if you followed the lines of capital, the patterns of influence, the shifts in who got funded and who didn't, you'd find me at the center. Delaney was no longer a firm. It was a framework. We had launched a code-based standards tool called OpenEthic, auditable, public, free to use. Within 3 months, 12 sovereign finance departments were running pilot tests with it. Some said we had become political. We hadn't. We had become undeniable. Callie pulled me aside one morning. We need to talk about the UN invitation. No. It's not a panel, Astrid. It's a keynote. General Assembly level. Global viewership. I didn't build Delaney to become a face. No, she said, you built it so the right people could speak. And now the world wants to listen. You don't have to be a face. Just a voice. I sighed. Then nodded. The UN keynote was scheduled for May. I wrote it myself, at night, in the quiet hours when the building echoed and the walls whispered back. I wrote it not for the heads of state, not for the press, for the girl I had been, the one who gave up asking to be seen and started drawing blueprints. The day of the speech, I wore gray. Unremarkable, neutral, intentional. The hall buzzed as I stepped onto the stage. When the lights dimmed, I began. I was once told finance is a language only the powerful understand. I learned to speak it, then I rewrote it. I talked about access, about dignity, about architecture that didn't collapse under the weight of inequality. I told them, we don't need to tear down every institution, but we do need to stop pretending the current ones serve everyone. By the end, the room was silent. Then someone stood, then another, and the applause was thunderous. That clip played in more countries than I could count. But it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the letters, emails, DMs, video messages, from a teenage girl in rural Brazil who watched the speech on a borrowed tablet, from a retired teacher in Ghana, from a laid-off programmer in the Philippines. They didn't want to congratulate me. They wanted to build. So we gave them tools. Delaney Commons rolled out a new program, Commons Local. Microgrants and framework kits, preloaded with compliance templates, training modules, and mentorship pairings. Within 2 months, 8,000 new collectives had launched. We didn't call it empowerment. We called it access. And we didn't run it from London. We ran it from Lagos, from Bogota, from Karachi, from Marseille. Not just offices, command centers. Then came the petition. A call to place Delaney at the center of a proposed international accountability exchange, a new global clearinghouse for ethical investment practices. More than 4 million signatures. Endorsed by economists, activists, educators. Rejected, predictably, by legacy institutions. One article accused me of dreaming too loud. I framed that one and hung it beside the first one that called me irrelevant. Because I wanted every intern to see the arc, to know what could change. I got a call from Ivy on a Tuesday afternoon. You're doing it, she said. Doing what? Everything they told us we couldn't. I paused. Are you okay? I'm better, she said. I'm still angry, but I think that's my fuel now. You always did like fire. She laughed. I miss her sometimes. The girl who thought she'd be queen. She still could be, just not in my house. Fair, she said. And this time, I was the one who hung up last. Why shock? The foundation building got a new wing. Donated anonymously. But I knew who it was. The plaque read, Snapeso e Futures West, in honor of stories reclaimed. We didn't hold a ceremony. We just opened the doors and let more in. By year's end, Delaney Ventures had funded 471 new ventures. Commons had translated into 56 languages. The name Astrid Whitaker had become shorthand in certain circles for something they once said couldn't be done. But I didn't feel famous. I felt used. In the best way. Like the world had finally found purpose for all the rage, all the planning, all the years I was ignored. Mine? I still walk early. Still plant notes in the intern wall. But now, the notes are answers. To the ones they leave in pencil. To the ones still finding their voices. And one morning, I left this. Times asterisk, build what they say is impossible. Then show them what it's for. Asterisk. Someone pinned it with a tiny gold tack. Under it, they wrote, Times asterisk, we will, asterisk. To be continued. By the 7th year, Delaney had outgrown language. Not entirely, but the words people used to describe us felt inadequate. Fund, firm, platform. None of them captured what we had become. We weren't just facilitating capital anymore. We were redistributing gravity. It began with a map. We built a real-time visualization of the entire Commons impact footprint. Every grant, every venture, every license, live data, dots appearing and shifting with every funded initiative, partnership, mentorship. We called it Pulse. The first time we projected it on the Foundation atrium wall, people stood in silence for 10 full minutes. It looked like a nervous system, alive, glowing. That night, someone pinned a note below the projection. Money asterisk. This is what an economy looks like when it breathes. Money asterisk. I kept it there. Ivy came to visit. Unannounced. It was late, after office hours. I was in the quiet corner of the mezzanine with an espresso and a stack of anonymous Commons submissions. She walked in wearing navy, no makeup, no entourage. Just herself. Thought you might be here, she said. And if I wasn't? Then I'd leave a note. I raised an eyebrow. She laughed. You're the only one I still write to on paper. We sat in silence at first. Then she said, I'm consulting now, not flashy, but honest. I'm glad. She reached into her coat pocket and slid a folded page toward me. It was a contract. A small community fund in the North. She'd helped them structure a participatory budgeting model using Delaney's open source tools. They don't know who I am, she said. Just that I care. I looked up. Then you're winning. After she left, I sat in the quiet again. My espresso had gone cold, but I felt warmer than I had all week. Delaney's governance structure had been tested, refined, and rebuilt 3 times. We operated as a living system, open source, decentralized feedback loops, real-time correction nodes. It scared traditional investors. But it attracted the ones who mattered, the ones who wanted to build forward. I received an invitation to address a consortium of central bankers. I declined. Instead, I sent a video message featuring 3 Delaney Commons grantees, a Venezuelan nurse, a Maori tech entrepreneur, and a disabled coder from Hungary. Each shared what they built. Each explained how they used our tools. Each outlined the economic logic behind inclusive design. The bankers listened. Then one wrote back, Chimes asterisk, we were wrong. The model works. I didn't frame it. I forwarded it to the interns. We launched a new branch, Delaney Signals, a dedicated initiative for anticipatory models, early warning systems for funding inequities, political blockages, institutional decay, predictive, adaptive, and scalable. Callie ran it. We're not just reacting anymore, she said. We're preparing. By the end of Q2, we had passed $5 billion in managed impact assets. But I didn't measure our success in billions. I measured it in a tiny classroom in Jaipur, where 12 girls used our Commons sandbox to design their own investment co-op. I measured it in a rural clinic in Montana, funded entirely by a collective of single mothers who used our templates to secure pooled equity. I measured it in resilience and joy. We held the 7th annual Delaney Assembly in Mexico City. No suits, no panels. Just learning circles, solution spaces, community meals. I gave one speech, 3 minutes long. We were told it wasn't possible, that no one would trust a fund built by the unheard, that open source was too risky, that equity was too radical. And yet here we are, not just surviving, not just scaling, but rewriting. Thank you for writing with me. Tears, laughter, a standing ovation not for me but for us. Because Delaney had never been a solo act. It had always been a chorus. My mother wrote again. She said, I watched the assembly. I cried. I think for the first time I understand who you are, and I love her. I folded the letter, carried it to the intern wall, pinned it gently, and wrote underneath, Times asterisk. It's never too late to see someone. Asterisk. That summer, a new analyst at Delaney asked me if I ever regretted not taking a more traditional path. I told her, there's nothing traditional about building something they said couldn't exist. She smiled, then asked, do you think we'll last? I looked out at the skyline. We already have. To be continued. The 8th year didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly. A team member's child took their first steps in the foundation lobby. One of our first ever Commons applicants became a regional finance minister in a post-conflict government. And a message appeared on the intern wall, written in black marker. Mice asterisk. I am who I am because someone here didn't laugh when I said I wanted to change the world. Asterisk. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. That spring, I began spending more time outside headquarters. Not because I was tired, but because Delaney had finally matured into a network that didn't require my shadow to function. It moved on its own now. Autonomous, responsible, relentless. Which gave me space. To reflect, to design, to listen. The first stop was Copenhagen. A Commons project there had scaled into a municipal budget modeling tool adopted by 3 cities. I spent 3 days shadowing the founders. They didn't know I was coming until I arrived. When they saw me, one of them, an urban planner in her 20s, started crying. I used your framework when I thought no one would fund anything I believed in, and then we built this. She wasn't looking for credit, just a witness. I stayed late that night, helping them input data. And before I left, she gave me a hand-drawn print that read, Times asterisk, we design futures. Asterisk. It now hangs in my office. In Nairobi, I met with the team running our Open Ethic beta on governmental procurements. The head of digital integrity there told me, you didn't just change how we code, you changed who gets to read the rules. That line stayed with me. Because it had always been about literacy. Economic, political, ethical. The right to asterisk understand the structures we live inside. To choose whether to accept them or replace them. Callie flew in to meet me in Jakarta. We hadn't shared a hotel room since our grad school days, but something about it felt right. We spent most of the night barefoot, eating room service on the floor and building a whiteboard roadmap with permanent markers on hotel notepads. You think this thing ever ends? She asked. What thing? This, the work, the rebuild. I sipped my tea. Not unless we let it. She nodded. Good. I'm not ready to stop. Neither was I. At the 9th annual Delaney Assembly, held in Cape Town, I didn't speak. Not at all. Instead, I sat in the front row and watched as a 21-year-old researcher from Lahore, a community banker from Glasgow, and a solar microgrid developer from Bogota presented a joint venture they'd met and built entirely through Commons. They didn't name it after any of us. They named it Trus Quetlas Tax Trus, Spanish for wave. Because, they said, this isn't a company, it's movement. I cried. Openly, in front of everyone. And no one looked away. Afterward, I stood beneath the banner in the courtyard that had become something of a tradition. Dompsas asterisk. We weren't invited to the table, so we built one. Asterisk, I placed my hand on the canvas, closed my eyes, and whispered, thank you for showing up, even when no one asked us to. The world began to shift. Slowly, then all at once. Regulators started citing our models in legislative drafts. Banks started hiring compliance teams trained on our ethics engine. Universities added Commons blueprints to their core curriculum. And for the first time in a century, a UN economic report included a line that said, Times asterisk distributed power isn't just possible, it's necessary. Asterisk is so. We didn't ask for that line. We just earned it. One day, a Delaney fellow from Istanbul asked me what scared me the most. I told her the truth. That we will be remembered for what we resisted, not what we built. She nodded. Then said, then let's keep building louder. By the end of the 8th year, we had launched a pilot program, Time to Delaney Currents, a modular, school-age finance and civic design curriculum designed by teachers, activists, and students themselves. The tagline was simple. Times, asterisk, learn the rules, then learn how to change them, asterisk. Within 6 weeks, 28 districts across 6 countries had signed on. We'd never moved that fast before. But the world was ready. And so were we. That winter, I returned to the foundation building. Alone. The interns had all gone home for break. The city was snow-laced and silent. I walked the atrium, read every note, touched the wall where the original pulse projection once shimmered. And I thought, we started with betrayal, with a promise broken, with a girl left out of her own future. And now? Now we were a constellation. A scaffolding for everyone who'd ever been told they couldn't lead. We weren't the footnote anymore. We were the blueprint. To be continued. Year 9 began with an email. Subject line, Tri-Sounds, asterisk, final confirmation, Astrid Whitaker, Hall of Change induction, asterisk. I stared at it for several long seconds. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Some part of me had known this was coming. Not the award, not the prestige, but the shift. The moment when legacy became something fixed, externalized, stamped into the public record. Recognition felt strange. But I accepted it. Because the truth was, I hadn't built Delaney to hide. I had built it so others could stand taller, speak louder, live freer. And sometimes being seen was part of protecting what mattered. The ceremony was set for the following spring, global broadcast, massive audience. An entire wall at the foundation was covered in congratulations. One intern posted a note. Masterisk, you made us believe quiet power wasn't an oxymoron. Thank you. I stood and stared at it longer than any headline. In the months leading up to the induction, I did what I always did. I worked. Delaney Signals launched a coalition to create a Global Resilience Index, an open access platform measuring communities' readiness not just for disasters, but for opportunity. Delaney Currents surpassed 100,000 student users. ONDA, the co-op born of Commons collaboration, won a Nobel nomination for peacebuilding through decentralized finance. And Ivy? She published a second book. Not about me. About herself. She sent me an early copy with a handwritten line. Asterisk. Sometimes we can't rebuild together, but we can grow side by side. Asterisk. I texted back, asterisk, thank you for writing it without hurting me. Asterisk. She replied, asterisk. This time, it wasn't about revenge, just truth. And for once, we were in the same story, separately, but without resentment. As the ceremony approached, the press buzzed. Old articles resurfaced, headlines from the early years. Think pieces about Ivy and me. Debates over who built what, who lost what, who deserved what. I didn't engage, because legacy isn't decided in comment sections. It's written in impact. And impact doesn't beg to be seen. It simply reshapes the world. The day of the Hall of Change induction, I wore gray again. No logo, no sparkle, just clarity. Callie sat in the front row. So did my mother. So did 3 women from Commons' first ever funded cohort. I walked to the podium in silence. Then I said, this isn't my ending, it's a marker, a cairn on the trail we're still walking. We didn't build Delaney to be admired. We built it so the next person wouldn't have to start from rubble. And if I leave you with anything, let it be this. Your story is yours. No one has the right to erase it. No one can stop you from rewriting it. Not if you keep going. I stepped back, and the applause didn't feel like praise. It felt like continuity. Later that night, I stood alone on the rooftop of the foundation. The city stretched around me, no longer towering, but balanced. In my hand was a letter, the last my father ever wrote me before he passed the previous autumn. I hadn't read it until that night. It said, "Astrid, you did more than survive us. You turned what we broke into something that no longer needs our names. That's the highest power, to create without needing credit, to walk away knowing others are safer because you stayed. I see you. Love, Dad." I folded it, tucked it into the back of my notebook, and I whispered to the sky, "I forgive you." Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to let go. Delaney turned 10 the next spring. We didn't hold a gala. We launched Delaney Signalcraft ***, a full-scale fellowship for young architects of systems, economic, social, and environmental. Not CEOs in training. Not influencers. Builders. Craftspeople of justice. The foundation's newest floor was named the Whispering Room. A space for anyone, staff, intern, visitor, to sit, write, and leave messages they didn't yet have the voice to speak aloud. Hundreds of notes lined its walls. One in particular stopped me, written in precise handwriting. Times **, you don't know me, but you gave me back my name. I was erased. Now I exist again. **, no signature. Just the words. And the impact. By the time Delaney reached 50 countries, no one used the word fund anymore. They called it a framework, an ecosystem, a quiet revolution. And when a child asked me during a currents workshop what I did for work, I smiled and said, "I build places where others can build." She nodded, serious, then asked, "Like a sandbox?" "Exactly like that." She grinned, then went back to drawing. I still walk early. Still press my palm against the wall where it all began. But I no longer carry the ache. Only the memory. Only the map. Only the truth. That what began in exclusion became a movement. What started in silence became a symphony. And what they denied me, I gave to the world. Tenfold. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.